The call came just past midnight, a call no family ever wants to receive. The kind that sends adrenaline through your veins before your brain even fully understands the words. Your grandpa's hurt. He's in the hospital and the situation is serious. That single moment changed everything, because by the time the family rushed to the ER, the sight that greeted them was unforgettable. Grandpa Rivers lying on a thin hospital bed, his arm twisted and locked in a heavy cast, his ribs tightly bandaged, bruises spreading across his weathered face like ugly reminders of the violence he had endured. His eyes were heavy with pain, but still burning with the stubbornness of a man who never backed down. And with a hoarse voice, he whispered two words that set the entire chain of events in motion. Fake cops. To truly understand how things spiraled into that hospital room, you have to know who was behind it, and that name was Brenda Hale, the HOA president who strutted around Foxglove Ridge as though she were a queen ruling over unwilling subjects. She had the Lexus, the pastel blazers, the clipboard brigade that trailed behind her at every community meeting, and the arrogance of someone who believed a neighborhood codebook was law. She fined people for grass that grew too high, for mailboxes she claimed didn't fit the aesthetic, even for curtains she said weren't HOA approved. Most residents just paid her ridiculous fines to avoid the endless hassle, but not Grandpa. He was a man cut from an older cloth, the kind who had cleared his land with his own hands, built his home board by board, and lived on that property for more than 50 years, long before Brenda ever imagined herself as ruler of a subdivision. When she tried to hand him violation letters, he laughed and tossed them into the fireplace, watching the paper curl in the flames. When she threatened him with liens and fines, he met her eyes and told her flatly, "Lady, you don't own me and you damn sure don't own this land." That defiance drove Brenda insane, because she wasn't used to anyone standing their ground. At first, she tried to bury him in paperwork, flooding his mailbox with phony notices. But when that didn't work, she showed up with her clipboard soldiers, waving papers that falsely claimed his property fell under HOA jurisdiction. Grandpa threw them back at her and shut the door in her face, but that wasn't enough to stop her. She escalated to something darker, something cowardly. One late night, neighbors reported hearing angry shouts at Grandpa's porch, then the sound of splintering wood, then a sharp, sickening crack. The men who rushed his door weren't police, though they dressed the part, black tactical vests with patches stitched across them, reading HOA Cops, cheap badges pinned to their chests, and boots that stomped across his porch like they had real authority. But they weren't cops. They were hired thugs, Brenda's muscle, paid to intimidate an old man into compliance. When Grandpa stood his ground, when he refused to cower, they snapped his arm like it was nothing and left him bruised and gasping for breath on his own living room floor. The cowardice of it all sent waves of anger through the family once the truth was clear. Brenda thought he was just an old man she could bully into silence, but she had forgotten something vital. Grandpa wasn't alone, his bloodline was strong, and his family stretched wide across the valley. And when word reached his cousins, men who wore leather and steel and rode with a loyalty that couldn't be bought, Brenda had no idea what storm she had just unleashed. Because the Iron Serpents had heard the call, and they were already on their way. The roar of engines shattered the quiet valley the following week, the kind of low thunder that made windows tremble and neighbors pull back their curtains in nervous curiosity. Because everyone knew the Iron Serpents didn't ride halfway, and they didn't ride for show. They rode for blood, for loyalty, for family. And when they heard what Brenda Hale and her fake cops had done to Grandpa Rivers, there was no hesitation. A dozen bikes lined the road outside his house, chrome flashing under the sun, tattoos gleaming like war paint, leather jackets telling stories of battles won and loyalty sworn. Vince, the sharpest of the cousins, was already reviewing the salvaged footage from Grandpa's security cameras, the ones Brenda's thugs hadn't managed to completely destroy. The grainy image froze on the three men in fake tactical gear, patches that read HOA Cops, faces partially covered but not enough to hide the limp, the tattoos, the sneers. Vince knew them. Everyone in the valley did. They were petty criminals who hung around Miller's scrapyard on Route 12, running cheap rackets and thinking they were tougher than they were. Now they had broken an old man's bones on Brenda's orders, and that was enough to seal their fate. At dusk, the Serpents rolled into the scrapyard like a storm. The thugs froze when they saw them dismount, the sudden silence heavier than any weapon. Vince stepped forward first, his voice low and cutting. "You boys like breaking old men's bones?" The tallest sneered, arrogance hiding his fear, and spat out that they were only enforcing community safety, that the old man had it coming. Wrong answer. Vince's knee slammed into his gut before another word left his mouth, folding him like paper. The second thug tried pulling a knife, but Dax, quick as lightning, twisted his wrist until the blade clattered in the dirt, pain etched across the man's face. The third thug bolted for the fence, but he didn't make it far. One of the cousins, trained in the military, brought him down hard, the gravel biting into his skin as blood dripped from his mouth. The fight didn't last long because justice was never meant to. When it ended, the three fakes lay sprawled on the dirt, groaning, stripped of their cheap uniforms, their patches ripped away, their fake badges tossed into a fire barrel until the plastic melted into smoke. Vince leaned in close, his voice calm but lethal. "This is interest for Grandpa. Next time, it won't stop at broken ribs." By the time dawn broke, the sheriff's office had already been tipped off. Deputies arrived, evidence in hand, to find the three imposters battered, their fraudulent gear piled in a heap, and bank transfers linking them straight back to Brenda's HOA account. The law didn't need much convincing. Charges stacked high, impersonating law enforcement. Felony assault on a senior, conspiracy to commit fraud, reckless endangerment, and Brenda herself was pulled in for aiding and abetting violent crime, her pastel blazer doing nothing to shield her as cuffs closed around her wrists. The HOA board, desperate to protect themselves, voted unanimously to remove her from power, her empire crumbling overnight. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt peace. And on his porch, with his cast resting gently on his lap, Grandpa Rivers sat with a steaming cup of coffee in his good hand, watching the horizon. His spirit was unbroken, his pride intact, and his family standing stronger than ever. The Iron Serpents rumbled out of the valley as quietly as they had come, leaving behind only the echo of their engines and the reminder that family is stronger than fear. Brenda thought she could control the valley with fines, papers, and hired cowards, but in the end it was family, loyalty, and justice that wrote the final chapter.